So this is a build around Indigon helmet, but before I continue, keep in mind this is a new item. It will take more time for community to figure out the best way to build around this item, so this is just my attempt to build around this helmet. I had certain idea what I wanted to do, and in most cases it does what I wanted it to do. I'm saying this because I know there's gonna be a lot of question, but why not this and why not that and that? I will try to explain how it works and all the other ideas that I had and what other things I tested, but there's simply no way I can explain everything and talk about all the other possible builds that you can do with this. So just keep it cool. First I'm gonna explain about this helmet, how it works, then why I picked Inquisitor, and then about my build. Timestamps, links and info will be in video description. Oh, and one more thing. Yes, this is very slow. You don't need to tell me how slow it looks like. But to be honest, I don't mind it because this build is very fun to me. Alright, already let's talk about the helmet. So the helmet, well, it is expensive because it drops from Uber Elder. But I was smart enough and fast enough to buy it when it was cheap for like 1.2x. Now it's like 3x at this recording. But I mean, for an item that allows you to increase your damage by 10 times or even more, I think this helmet is pretty cheap, right? Okay, how it works. So basically every 200 mana spent, it increases your mana cost and it increases your spell damage. By the way, this is recently spent mana. One more thing to note about this helmet, you must be spending mana. Spending life or energy shield will not trigger the helmet buff. So the faster and the more mana you consume, the faster your mana cost will ramp up. Same goes for damage. So what you want is actually to increase your mana cost, because you do need a certain threshold before you can ramp up the damage. If you spend too little mana, you will not be able to ramp up the damage fast, and if you spend too much mana, you will not be able to regenerate mana and ramp up the damage for longer. Also, if you spend too much mana too fast while mapping, it will feel horrible to level up like that. So I was trying to find the balance between that. So at the start I was using fated version of Doedri's gloves. They do give flat 50 mana cost to skills, and that cost is increased by all the other mana cost from your helmet. Another option is to use Fevered Mind Jewels. Actually, I'm using two of them. Another option for a crit build would be Voidbringer Gloves, which gives up to 80% increased mana cost of skills. And lastly, Apep's Rage Wand, 40% increased mana cost of skill for each of those wands, so you could dual wield them. And they also give increased cast speed. However, no mana or mana regen. Now, there is another way to trigger this buff from your helmet, without actually increasing your mana cost of skills. You can use Spell Totem with Aura, or if it costs too much mana, you can use Spell Totem with Blasphemy Curse. So that way, with one click, let's say you could use like 90% of your mana instantly and get a massive buff from the helmet. And then hit with your spells that, for example, maybe it costs no mana, or maybe Detonate Mines to do the insane amount of damage. However, I found that this method has a big drawback, unless you have like 15-20,000 of mana. Because if you have, let's say, 4000 mana and you consume, let's say, 4000 mana with one click, you will gain up to 1200 spell damage, if your helmet has a perfect spell damage roll. But you could get more if you could regen it and continuously use your mana, which you don't if you do it just in one click, unless of course you got like very high mana regen and got from 0 to 4000 in like 1 second and use it again to get another damage boost. But that is very unreliable and very difficult to time it right, because as soon as you stop spending mana, you start losing your damage boost. So it works very nicely with channeling skills, because you continuously use mana and continuously regen it until you reach a point where with one cast you spend over 3000 or even more mana. And with my setup I can boost my damage 10 times from the initial tooltip DPS. So let's say in the hideout I have 4000 tooltip DPS on my Flameblast without any stages, and once I fully ramp it, it goes over 40,000. And I believe it's possible to get even more damage, but basically getting spell damage or elemental damage from passive skill tree is basically useless when you get thousands of increased spell damage. Now, with all the damage calculations only using 2 flasks, I can hit over 1.5 million damage against Shaper and his Guardians. Now, obviously in reality you will not have a chance to pre-charge it for that much, because it takes like 4 or 5 seconds to charge it to that amount of damage. By the way, this is on a 5 link. On a 6 link you would obviously consume more mana, so you would be able to charge it faster. With 6 link setup I would gain more damage, but I would not be able to increase my damage multiplier by 10 times. Maybe by 7, maybe by 8 at best. And the end damage would still be very similar to around 1.5 million against Shaper. But this build is not for Shaper and not really very high end game viable. It's just not for that. You don't get to just stand and charge for 4 seconds. But I'm pretty sure people will figure out a way to do it. So we talked about mana consumption and how to increase mana and damage scaling. Now let's talk about Ascendancy choices. For now I just see 2 choices. There may be more in the future when we figure out better way to do it. Inquisitor and Trickster. I did not pick Trickster because it does not work with channeling skills. And I'm talking about Weave the Arcane. Trickster's Weave the Arcane gives 20% chance to recover 10% of your maximum mana when you use a skill. But this can only trigger once at the start of the channeling skill. If it doesn't trigger, it will not trigger. So basically you cannot use it with channeling skill. And since my choice was Flameblast, which is channeling skill, I went with a second option, which is Inquisitor. Now Inquisitor's Pious path gives 6% mana regen while you are standing on consecrated ground. And 6% mana regen is a big deal. Now you do trigger consecrated ground when you get hit, or when you kill by chance. However, the easiest way and guaranteed way is to just use Sulfur Flask, which gives consecrated ground on use. There are also of course other benefits of having consecrated ground, but I don't have enough time to talk about everything. So let's talk about my build, I guess. Now this time I'm gonna talk about my items, passive skill tree, and then skills and links. As always, path for building import code will be in the description. Now this is a heavy mana build, so you do need a lot of mana and a lot of mana regen. And nothing gives more mana than Pledge of Hands. 100% increase maximum mana. Now the spell echo does not affect channeling skills, and the tiny amount of 150 spell damage does basically nothing, because you are getting thousands of increased spell damage anyway. So it is a cheap option and it gives a lot of mana. And I am using 5 link for my one-shot setup. And I have already mentioned my damage for Flameblast. Now for leveling this is not gonna be good, but I'm gonna talk about that later. You kind of want a second staff for your clear speed setup and then Pledge of Hands for your single target. Or maybe you will come up with other options. Then obviously Indigon Helmet, then Atziri Splendour armor, but there are many other options. I was experimenting with Shaper Elder armors, which recover either life or mana on kill. Also tried Cloak of Defiance, but I simply end up with Atziri Splendour. It simply gives everything you need: life and mana gain on kill, life, resistances, and a lot of armor. Then you need stun avoidance or stun immunity. For that I am using Kaom's roots. Traveling towards Unwavering Stance was a bit too far away, and you could get 100% stun avoidance, but you would have to sacrifice 6 passive nodes and at least 2 jewel sockets with extra stun avoidance while casting skill. So you're just gonna have to experiment. But obviously using Kaom's roots and leap slamming with such a slow staff is, well, too slow for most people. But not me. I like to take it slow, admire the view, and then I switched to my other character that had 40% increased movement speed, and I was shocked how much faster it is, so By the way, this is level 84, so it is possible to reach Unwavering Stance and use different boots. Or different weapon setup like fast daggers with a lot of mana and mana regen, but you would have to get 5 link or 6 link on your armor. Oh, by the way, you want either Willing Blade with daggers or Leap Slam because you want to use Fortify. Because this build is pretty squishy, and without Fortify it can be pretty monka-esque when mapping. Now for the amulet I am using Atziri's Foible because it just gives insane amount of mana and mana regen. And also it lowers the attribute requirements for your gems and items, which is kind of needed because you don't have a lot of decks. Next for the jewels, I am using Pure Talent, 2 Fevered Mind, and Watcher's Eye, and Healthy Mind. Wait, did I say that this build is not cheap? As for the flasks, you can ignore all the flasks except for probably Atziri's Promise and my Sulfur Flask, which gives me Con Ground. Now the absolute insanity would be with Zerf's Flask, which costs between 10 and 15 exalts. because it only drops from Brandus maps, which is level 7 Zana mod in this league. You may be able to get it other ways like beast crafting, but I don't know. Now, another questionable flask is Lavianga Spirit. Basically, you use it when you can no longer sustain your mana, and when you cannot stop casting spells because you would die. So, for example, in Breaches, you just use it when your mana cost becomes too high, so you can recover your mana and keep using it to maintain your casting, but you need to time it very well. Now, my alternate staff setup is this one. Yes, this is pretty OP stuff. I managed to get lucky and craft it. I use this stuff for my casual channeling setup just for mapping. As for the gloves, I wanted to increase my survivability, so I wanted a global blind chance. And I needed more maximum mana on my gloves. Believe it or not, I used one Orb of Binding and I got this. I used Orb of Binding because I was so broke I couldn't even afford to 4-link my gloves. And I got very lucky. But basically for this setup, for mapping, having blind is very nice. And the other stats that you need is life, some resistances and mana. The global cast speed could also be nice. Now for my rings and belt are just to cover my resistances, but also for rings I am also trying to get a lot of mana and mana regen as much as possible. And you still need to get resistances because you really need them. So I even use multiple jewels with double resistance mods. So to sum up, this is pretty expensive build. I don't even know how I managed to put this build without having any currency. Now let me show you my passive and also mention a couple more unique jewels. The basic rule for passive skill tree is lots of mana, as much as possible life, strength because strength also gives flat life, then cast speed, elemental damage resistances and AoE, and of course mind over matter. I did specifically connect Witch, Templar and Scion starting point because I am using pure talent. Pure Talent gives extra 25 attributes if connected to Scion, 5% elemental penetration if connected to Templar, and 0.5% of maximum mana regen per second if connected to Witch starting area. Healthy Mind unique jewel is in here to convert these life nodes into mana nodes to get more mana. You don't really have to use this, but I really wanted as much mana as I could get. Then I bought Watcher's Eye with 30% increased mana recovery rate while affected by clarity. Now this actually gives a lot of mana regen. If I remove this, I lose about 700 mana regen. You can also get the same mod on a belt, but it's pretty difficult and you also need all your resistances and other stuff. So, well, I couldn't get it. Then 2 Fevered Mind jewels and 2 more jewels just to cover my resistances, get more maximum mana, or just flat physical, cold, or lighting damage to spells, but just not fire. Why not fire? Because this build is using elemental equilibrium. And that's perfect transition talking about skills and links. For my mapping clear speed setup, I swapped to my crafted staff and use Incinerate, lesser multiple projectiles, faster projectiles, ball lighting and Iron Will. Iron Will because it does not increase my mana cost even more, which I really don't need. And my staff has Arcane Surge and Casual Channeling supports. If you cannot get those, at least try to get either Arcane Surge or Casual Channeling, and maybe just not use Iron Will. Now the Incinerate with Casual Channeling ball lighting works very well if you have elemental equilibrium, because your hits alternate between fire damage and lighting damage, rotating elemental equilibrium each time. It's not perfect, but it still works. I tried so many different options with this. If you're not using elemental equilibrium and just want smoother mapping, I really enjoyed using Scorching Ray, Casual Channeling, Flame Surge, because Flame Surge does more damage against burning enemies and Scorching Ray does burn enemies. And both Scorching Ray and Flame Surge does get the damage boost from the helmet. And yes, you can make it into the pure Scorching Ray build, but for mapping it's probably not gonna be as good because you need to ramp up your damage. Also, I have tried these combos. Lighting Tendrils with Casual Channeling Glacial Cascade, Lighting Tendrils with Casual Channeling Ball Lighting, just Glacial Cascade, just Ball Lighting, Wither with Casual Channeling Summon Skeletons Dark Pact, Flameblast with Casual Channeling Glacial Cascade. Basically insert any channeling skill with Casual Channeling with any spell. It's up to you. This build is made in a way where you can use almost any skills, as long as they scale with spell damage. Now I know this crossed your mind, but what would be Ignite damage? With a massive of over 1 million damage with one hit, you would be doing about 3 3000 ignite damage. Yep, you heard it, 3000 ignite damage. Because ignite is a separate instance and it does not scale with spell damage, so yeah, rip ignites. Okay, so for my main setup I am using Flameblast, Arcane Surge, Elemental Focus, Fire Penetration and Concentrated Effect. For 6ling probably would use Control Destruction or maybe level 3 Empower. By the way, I am using level 21 zero quality Flameblast because they are very cheap in this league. I am also using Clarity and Herald of Ash, but if you are using Herald of Ash, make sure you do not have Glacial Cascade or any physical damaging skills. At least with this setup, because you don't want to mess up your elemental equilibrium. Now, Herald of Ash is not required. It does increase your initial damage, but you have less mana to spend, which means less ramp up damage. But it also adds extra clear speed. Then I have Orb of Storms, Curse on Hit, Increased Critical Strikes, and Warlord's Mark. I was using Elemental Weakness before, but I really lacked survivability, so I started using Warlord's Mark to get Leech, Mana Leech, and also to generate Endurance charges, which makes me a bit tankier. And lastly, I am using Leap Slam with faster attacks, Fortify, and also have Decoy Totem. Oh, and actually I'm also using Val Clarity, but Lavianga Spirit should be enough if you can time your potion right. Instead of Val Clarity, you could use Val Lightning Trap, so you would be able to deal even more damage against shock targets. Or even use Spell Totem with Scorching Ray, but that means no Decoy Totem. Whew, that's about all. I must say, I really enjoy playing this build, and one-shotting map bosses is just so satisfying. Even if you don't always one-shot, you can still see their life just disappear. I can't wait to see what the community will invent using this helmet. And I'm pretty sure there is a way to just basically one-shot Shaper's Guardians with this helmet. There are different builds that can literally one-shot almost anything in the game, using minion instability, but I'm not gonna talk about that. Now, a quick guide how to one-shot map bosses and how to set this up. Go to map boss, drop Decoy Totem, drop Orb of Storms on it to trigger Elemental Overload and proc Elemental Equilibrium, and begin the charge. Drop Con Ground. When you can barely maintain your mana to get more regen, keep dropping Con Ground if you can, and then just use the Atziri's Promise Flask or any other damaging flask that you have, and boom. As for my next build, I think I'm gonna do something meme-like. Again, as always, I mean. This is a really long build guide video, but there was a lot to talk about. So if you are new and endured all the way, congratulations. Check my previous builds, I do have a pretty decently organized playlist. Maybe you'll find something interesting. Also I got couple funny and entertaining videos to watch. And that's about all. Thank you for watching and see you soon.